Welcome to another episode of On Patrol with the Suffolk County PBA. I'm CJ Hutter, the treasurer of the PBA.
I'm Tanner Brandmeier, the Sergeant at Arms of the PBA.
And today we're excited to have Rebecca Sanin on. Rebecca is the Suffolk County Legislator for the 16th District. Thanks for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
So for anybody out there watching, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you want to get involved in politics?
Sure. So for me, my whole life has been about public service. I've worked in either government or the nonprofit sector since I started working. And I look at politics as a vehicle. I don't look at it as the end result. It's really about public service and how do we take care of our communities, protect public safety, protect our environment, make sure people can live here and stay here and live their best lives. And that's what I love to do.
Right. And I'm glad you bring up public safety and people being able to live here and stay here, because it seems like in every political poll I've seen, those are the top two issues.
Yep.
Right? Public safety, people want to feel safe where they live, and people want to be able to afford to raise their families and for the families to stay there and not have to get broken up and move to other states somewhere else.
100%. I hear it every single day in my office. I hear it at the doors. I hear it everywhere.
Yeah.
People are really concerned about the price of living on Long Island, and they want to live in safe communities as they should.
Right. Now,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, you have a history working for the Bologna administration and a lot of your nonprofit work. And a lot of that nonprofit work had to do with kind of keeping things affordable here and helping younger adults get their lives started to be able to stay here in Suffolk County.
100%. And it actually, a lot of the nonprofit work also related to public safety. So when I was running the Health and Welfare Council as the CEO, I worked with Drew Fiorello from Homeland Security in Suffolk County PD to train every nonprofit in active shooter protocols, because we were seeing an increase in that across the country. And I wanted to make sure our nonprofit employees were ready in case of a crisis. I also ran the Long Island volunteer organization Active in Disaster, which is all about disaster preparedness and disaster response for things like Superstorm Sandy or COVID-19. And all of that work involved, and was really important to have, law enforcement engagement and working together hand in hand to make sure we're taking care of people's safety needs, we're taking care of their human needs, just taking care of people.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know you just brought up Superstorm Sandy, like what was that like? I know you dealt with getting resources to Long Island to deal with that. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I could talk to you about two disasters because I had the interesting opportunity of playing a lead role in both. So Superstorm Sandy, I was working in the Bologna administration, and I helped run disaster recovery centers. I helped people dealing with unbelievable, unconscionable, like overnight homelessness, right, that we saw across the South Shore of Long Island in particular. So really making sure we were doing everything we can to get them resources, to partner with groups like the Red Cross, and make sure people were safe during a time in which, people didn't have power and didn't have communication capacity. That was very scary for families. And of course, for people who were struggling before, like our seniors, for example, they take the longest to recover. People who are vulnerable take the longest to recover from disaster. So that work was not limited to 2012. It really went on for the next 10 years. And then I was the CEO of a large nonprofit organization during COVID-19 and had to lead the nonprofit sector in responding to that, working with our federal government, regularly having our senators and congressmen in front of hundreds of nonprofit executives to talk about those federal resources, our state government, our county executives in Nassau and Suffolk, and working with, law enforcement, working with first responders, working with emergency medical response teams to make sure people were getting what they needed, because it affected every community differently, and you have to take care of everybody.
Yeah, and that COVID-19 time was very interesting because of its uniqueness, right? So like Superstorm Sandy, as horrible as it was, there's been hurricanes throughout the country that could kind of set a little bit of a template of how to handle it. COVID-19 was a little more unique, where we were closing businesses, people weren't able to see each other. All of a sudden, Zoom became the norm.
Yep.
So that was very unique in itself. And it's got to be kind of weird to not really have a template, because I can't think of anything maybe prior to the Spanish flu that could even be comparable.
Yep, 100%. And the most important thing in a disaster is coordination and communication.
Right.
So that's what we really, work to do with, our partners in government and the nonprofit sector, working together to serve people. But there are a lot of public safety impacts of COVID-19 that continue today. A lot of parents, for example, were working from home with kids at home, trying to manage their schooling online. Many of them had never had a digital presence before.
Right.
And then trying to keep their own jobs. And the economic stress of that led to things like domestic violence and child abuse and other things
Right.
like
There's
that.
a definite domino effect with all those
100%.
additional stressors.
And then we also know that so many people developed substance abuse issues because it was really hard to get through the day. So people were, drinking at noon and using other kinds of things that today people are still not recovered from. And so, the mental health impact on our children and on our seniors and on people who were isolated from one another continues today and has a public safety impact. So we have to really get resources to families and, help just sort of be there for the community in meaningful ways.
Right. And, being in that sort of situation, especially for, say, teenagers at the time, losing out on life experiences like going to their senior prom or, a homecoming dance or a homecoming game, right? There were sports seasons that were canceled.
100%.
Athletes that lost out on their senior year of playing baseball, right? So this was a huge effect on a lot of the young people that are just starting off on their adult life and maybe just for the first time paying attention to what's going on with politics and the world around them and how the public is served.
Yep. It was a collective trauma, right? It affected, people during times in their trajectory that were really hard, for sure. But I hear from employers too, right? So you had a lot of young people who, ended up doing college at home, for example, sitting in their, childhood bedroom on a computer instead of, having a good time with friends and
life
growing.
experience.
The social setting changed definitely. I mean, I think that definitely had an effect on those high school and college kids in particular.
Hugely. And it affects, their beginning in their career path because so many of those young people didn't learn what we learn when we have internships and have experiences out in the workplace. So I hear it all the time from employers. They hire folks who don't know how to interact. Right. They do it this way.
Someone brought that up recently to me. They were like, I miss the days of when you could walk up to somebody and look them in the eye and have a handshake. You don't really see that from the new employers coming to the workforce as much because of, I think, that in particular.
Yeah. There was just this gap in time in which we were so isolated from each other socially. And it continues to hurt businesses today, quite frankly. A lot of folks just don't know how to interact with each other, and the incredible explosion of the digital world, and now with AI as well, has made it harder even sometimes to know if you're having a conversation with a person or a robot.
Right. Those AI images and videos, sometimes it's hard to tell the real versus the fake.
It's very easy to distort someone's face. It's very easy to distort their behavior, what they're doing, who they're with. And it's a serious danger for our kids, and it's a danger for society when you can't tell whether or not something is real.
Well, I think those apps too, like Snapchat, Instagram, they're just the kids are much younger that are going on on those apps now and using the social media platforms, which are great in certain ways, but in other ways they can be very dangerous when you're younger and you're naive to what's out there.
When I worked in the county executive's office the first time, 2012 to 2017, I ran the task force to prevent family violence. So working with a lot of domestic violence agencies. And one of the things that we did was to create material and really try to educate parents that if you wouldn't drop your child off at Times Square at midnight alone, then you cannot let them keep a cell phone in their room overnight alone because it's the same access. In fact, it's more access. And it's very hard for, when you talk about Snapchat and you talk about some of these things for parents who didn't grow up in the digital world to monitor. And it's really important to put those boundaries in place to keep our kids safe.
Yeah, and that's a good point because, we didn't have this level of social media growing up. I mean, for me, towards the end of high school, and I don't even think it was in high school. I think it was in college. All of a sudden, MySpace became popular. A lot of people don't even know what MySpace is anymore.
Yep.
Right. So they're growing, the teenagers now and the people in their 20s, they grew up with this normalcy of social media, the ease of access to information that prior generations didn't have.
100%. I remember my dad, who was in technology, telling me about email and that it was going to be a big thing. And I laughed at him and I said, Dad, nobody's ever going to type letters to each other. That's so formal. That's crazy.
Right.
I was wrong.
Now we don't even write in script anymore. I remember learning script when I was a kid. I was like, this is useless now. Nobody writes in script.
Yeah, I haven't written in script besides my signature in 20 years.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
I know. Things change so fast.
Yep, it is. It's incredible. So, one of the things I want to touch on is your prior experience in the county executive's office and your role in government, even prior to being an elected official. Yep. So what are some of the other responsibilities you had? I know, you kind of led the way during Superstorm Sandy and during COVID-19, some of those emergency response things. But what about some of the maybe day-to-day issues, like maybe some of the, normal Monday through Friday sort of things were you involved in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I did a lot of continuous improvement work. So working with departments, helping them do things better, helping bring tools and resources to our county employees, which was so important. I ran the task force to prevent family violence. So that was working with every county department that impacts people. So law enforcement, social services, health, all of those departments, as well as the nonprofit sector, to better improve outcomes for families that were dealing with violence and that were in difficult and unsafe situations. I helped to revamp the workplace violence, discrimination, and sexual harassment policies for the county. And then I was a trainer and I trained people on those policies. And then I became an investigator. So when there were, bad cases, a lot of times I would get called in, or if it was a high level case, I would get called in to make sure that we were following through and we were protecting our employees while they were at work. So those were some of the things that I did, but certainly Superstorm Sandy was a big one. And managing constituent response was a big part of my work at that point. And so really, I was new in government in 2012 and I was there about 5 minutes before, Superstorm Sandy hit. So as I was learning government, I was called on to be a very powerful responder to what was facing our communities. So it was a great way to learn very, very quickly what the opportunities are in a crisis and how to bring those resources to people.
I think the relationships are like a lot of what I'm hearing from you is like you deal a lot with like the not-for-profits.
Yeah.
Government, police, and all these different agencies. How important are the relationships to getting the resources that you need to a certain event or to a certain problem that's going on?
100%. I tell people all the time, first of all, my favorite identity is being a connector. I love to connect people. I love to bring people together and help solve problems. I think that our human capacity is amazing when we come together. And by the way, that's across the aisle, right? So I'm a Democrat.
I appreciate that you said that too.
Yeah, no, I'm a Democratic legislator. I work with my Republican colleagues, and I don't believe that good things happen when you stay in a corner. You have to work together. You have to listen to people with different perspectives. And quite frankly, we do better when we come to the middle and meet the needs of our communities. And so I think relational capital is everything. If you want to get things done, you have to know who people are, who can help move the needle. And people have to trust you. And I take my integrity very seriously. If I tell someone I'm going to do something, I deliver. And I love to listen to people and I love to help them. One of the best parts of being a legislator are those relationships that you make differently with community. So for years, I've made those relationships with experts and with leaders in the field. But now I'm talking to people at the community level that are, struggling with really serious issues. I have a man, for example, who's about 85. He's a veteran. His wife has Alzheimer's. So he called my office one day many, many, many months ago. And he just needed some resources. And I spent a couple months getting him every resource that existed for him. But then I realized he didn't have kids and he didn't have anyone checking on him. And what he really needed was a friend. So we just kind of set up a weekly call where I call him and I check in and we talk and he tells me what's hard and what's not hard. And it's a way, again, of serving our community. And that's really what I love to do.
And I love that sort of personal touch too, because that's the kind of thing you get from local elected officials, right? I mean, a lot of times national narratives kind of drown out what's going on locally. But your compassion and your ability to reach those people in your constituency close to home, there's a value there that you can't really put a price tag on.
100%. And it's all about recognizing that our neighbors and our neighborhoods have to come together.
Right.
I really deeply believe that. It's how I've always operated. Way before, any kind of professional work, I was an advocate in my community and just helped to fight for better things.
Right.
And I think it's all about bringing neighbors together and remembering that that's our strength. Long Island, I love Long Island. It's America's first suburb. It's a place I'm so grateful I was raised and I'm so glad to be living here today. And it's really our communities that make it so, magnificent.
Right. And, Tanner and I, we talk all the time about the value in Suffolk County, how the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, everybody can kind of work together. They maintain those open lines of communication. You just touched on that. We talk to Rich Schaefer very often. Rich Schaefer openly discusses, the value of being able to just come into common sense solutions because we all live here. We all want, even if you look at the national narrative, everybody wants to be safe. Everybody wants what they view as best for their family. But here in Suffolk, we have very moderate representatives who very easily work together. They're not always battling. They're not always at each other's throat, and it ends up being a better government for the constituents.
For me, they're not just my colleagues. Many of them are my friends, right? I mean, it's about seeing our humanness in each other. And that, to your point, we want many of the same things. When I ran the nonprofit that I was running, I led the 2020 census effort for Long Island. And so we had hundreds and hundreds of people in this large coalition that we created. Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, all different kinds of people that came together to say we need to secure the billions of dollars for our community that then impact the next 10 years for things like federal resources for public safety, for our first responders, for infrastructure, to meet the needs of our community. So I've always worked not just across the aisle, but with people that are very different than me. And I personally think I grow from those experiences and that we get to a better solution when we work with people that are not, our echo chamber, but that are challenging us a little bit.
Right. And that's important to keep in mind, too. When we could get those census numbers to accurate levels to reflect the actual population here in Suffolk County, that's how we could get funding federally, to assist the local government for public safety, right? Because some of the stuff that gets funded for the police department is actually through federal grants.
100%.
Yep.
And so for public safety, for law enforcement, for our fire departments, for our schools, for our infrastructure, everybody talks about the challenges of some of the roads on Long Island. All of that money comes when people are counted. And those dollars that count last for the next 10 years. And so it's so vitally important. We're coming up on 2030, believe it or not, soon, because you have to start preparing a couple of years prior. I love leading that work. I love reminding people that they count and that they're here and that we need to make sure we count them because a lot of people are suspect. They don't necessarily want to fill out forms, but it's so important to get those dollars so we can have the best communities we can have. Right.
And there is a balancing act with that because, again, I don't want national issues to drown out local issues because we need these people to be counted. We need to be able to get the funding we need to properly police our neighborhoods. But there is that balancing act because you also don't want too many, say, non-registered voters or people who have illegal status here to affect, congressional seats, right? You don't want too many people that maybe, I want to word this correctly because there is a balance involved, but you want to be able to get the funding here that we need to properly keep everybody safe, but you don't want to affect too much of the national spotlight or to create rhetoric in a negative way.
I think it's just so important to get the dollars that our region deserves. And the reality is our roads hold however many people are driving on our roads. And so we need to know the number. So I think we just have to do everything we can to have as a strong account as we can. Again, so that law enforcement can respond to whatever our communities look like so that, our schools can educate whatever their population looks like. That's just, that's the important part of it is the resources.
Yeah, the resources of it, like you said, like the people on the road, I feel like sometimes, especially when you go to the city, I grew up in the city and there's just so many people around. You have to make sure that doesn't necessarily come out here because we don't have the same type of roads and the same, maybe the resources that they have. But as population continues to grow, we're going to have to improve the roads, make more roads for all this traffic on the roadway.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that my constituents bring to me a lot is frustration with driver behavior, right? People call my office all the time with, people aren't stopping at the stop sign ever, or people are driving like crazy here. And I actually have a theory about infrastructure development for the future that I haven't talked a lot about, but I'll just share it here. I think we've done a lot to try to impact driver behavior, right? Like we've been doing don't drive drunk ads since I was a kid. Don't drive distracted. These are education courses that people take when they're even learning to drive. And yet it's still bad. And so I think we have to start looking at infrastructure from crime prevention through environmental design. How can we change the way our roads are here on Long Island? How can we, as we're developing our roads, think about impacting driver behavior through how our roads are structured? Maybe a road needs to be a one-way road because it's hard to police, because people are doing things on that road and driving a certain way that makes it challenging. But I think we have to start looking at those principles of environmental design impacting crime prevention when we think about road development.
Right, a little outside of the box thinking. We faced issues here with the street takeovers, and the legislature and County Executive Romaine's office were very supportive of the police, giving us the tools and funding we need to create a whole new unit to combat that issue. Right, so it's very important to have that. The ideas of we're already doing things, but what can we do differently to affect the issues we're still having?
100%. One of the first things that I worked with the police on when I came into office, I had reached out to then Acting Commissioner Waring and set up a meeting with all the different precincts to talk about the park and rides and the things that were happening and impacting particularly the Dix Hill side of my district, with people, bringing cars together and then blasting their, radios, until all hours of the night. And that has, improved dramatically. And that's really important that we work together.
And there's so much like the parking rides are really supposed to be a resource for people that are going to leave their
100%.
car and go to work, or they might go on like a trip somewhere to leave it there for like a day or so.
Right.
And what it was turning into is like a meetup spot for all these people to get together and then cause problems in the community.
And it was social media. It was interesting as I learned about it that they were using to plan their meetups. So it was a lot of times people from Queens and people from Nassau County coming into Suffolk.
Right.
And they would get like an alert on social media, like come here. And that group would go there. And so the police, obviously working on looking at social media and working on really presenting summonses to folks that were doing the wrong thing. It really made a difference. I get no complaints about that anymore. It's pretty incredible.
Right. And creating those deterrent, you need the intel to be able to put our resources in place to create those deterrents. But, with these meetups, we started confiscating the vehicles. We started crushing the vehicles, creating big fines. You have to make sure penalties fit the crime so that it actually becomes a deterrent.
Yep.
And people don't just see it as a cost of doing business. Like, oh, this is fun. I'm willing to pay $100 fine, but maybe I'm not willing to pay a $5,000 fine. 100%.
It's the same thing with, a lot of the traffic issues in my district. I work with the 2nd and the 3rd precinct, and we'll say, can we set up enforcement? Because if 50 people get tickets for going through the stop sign or driving too fast, suddenly the word gets out in the neighborhood that people are looking at this area, and that changes. It deters that bad behavior.
Right.
And it's, the same thing for folks that are selling vapes and things to young people, right? It needs to hurt them financially and economically to stop the illegal behavior. 100%.
So one of the other things I want to make sure we touch on, and it kind of goes along with, supporting first responders and public safety, but it also goes along the lines of that bipartisan cooperation we get here in Suffolk County, is you are a major driver of the first responder, first-time homebuyer bill for Suffolk County to give volunteer firefighters and EMS an opportunity to live in the areas that they want to live in, that they've grown up in.
100%. So that was really important to me. When I first became elected, I met with all of our firehouses and our volunteer EMSs, and I said, tell me what I don't know, teach me what's important. And what they shared with me was so often young people would join and then they would invest in them and they'd train them. And a couple of years later, they didn't want to live in mom's basement anymore, and they'd leave for North Carolina or Florida or somewhere else. And it was becoming a real recruitment and retention crisis. The reality is, if we ever want to have anything be affordable on Long Island, we have to keep our volunteer force. If we ever had to pay for it, forget it. They save us millions of dollars annually. We'd be in a really bad situation. So talking with them, one of the biggest barriers was affordable housing. And I worked with a lot of the fire associations as well to learn from them. And so I introduced a bill to say, let's set aside a percentage of workforce housing for our first responder volunteers. And I'm really proud of that because it really makes a difference. These are people who, like law enforcement, are running into situations that are really perilous that the rest of us are running out of. And we want them to live in the communities in which they serve. That's important for not just them, but for the community itself.
And they're doing it on a volunteer basis too. Like that. I know they have other jobs too, but when you're giving up the amount of time that they give up to serve the community.
Christmas morning, Thanksgiving.
Yes, exactly. Those are the people that are showing up to put out a fire or to treat grandma or whoever is having a medical incident.
100%.
There deserves to be some kind of incentive or some kind of opportunity to stay in the community.
Yeah, I mean, we have to incentivize volunteerism. We've seen a drop with younger people volunteering less just in general. And we have to incentivize that. We have to recognize when people are giving up their time and their own safety for our communities, we really need to respond to that and meet them where they are and be good to them. Right.
Yeah, I thought that was a great bill. I was happy to see that signed into law. And it did highlight bipartisan efforts as well.
I like the fact that you reached out to them and had to sit down because you didn't know what they were going through and what the problem was. I think that having the foresight to do that and be like, oh, I'm not aware of this issue, and then let me learn a little bit and see what kind of solution I can come up with. I applaud you for that.
No, thank you. It's the same way I feel with law enforcement. I'm not a law enforcement expert. If there's a law enforcement issue in my district, I'm reaching out to my precincts or I'm reaching out, to the commissioner's office or to the PBA to say, help me understand this. I want to take care of people. That's why I'm doing this work. That's truly why I'm doing this work. And so I don't pretend to know what I don't know. I just, again, going back to that concept of being a connector, try to bring people around me who can teach me and help me to do a better job.
Right. And there's great value to that. I'm bringing up Rich Schaefer again, but we talked about that when it comes to the book, Ego is the Enemy, right?
Yes.
Understand that you don't know everything. Be willing to learn because, we went through issues with bail reform and criminal discovery for court cases. And we had Ray Tierney on just last week. And he acknowledged maybe there were some changes that need to be made, but maybe they went too far. And maybe if there's open lines of communication, we could avoid those mistakes of going too far. Let's try to bring some things back. And open lines of communication can avoid those overcorrections or creating different problems in the attempt to try to fix a current problem.
100%. I really do believe ego is the enemy, right?
Yeah.
I think, the problem is a lot of people look at politics as the end destination. To me, it's a vehicle to public service. It should be about taking care of your community. It's the only reason why you should run for office is because you want to take care of people. And so it's really important to get back to listening. I don't think people listen to each other well anymore. Everything is a soundbite on TikTok or whatever it is. We have to get back at having conversations and being vulnerable. If you don't agree with me on something or you think I'm wrong, I want to understand your perspective and maybe I'll change my opinion on it. It's important to listen.
As an elected official, it's not about you, it's about them.
100%.
I think that's what you're saying.
Always. It's what wakes me up every day, excited to go to work. And, people ask me sometimes, if you weren't in your position, what would you be doing? And my answer is always, I'd be doing the exact same thing, probably with a different title, but it's what I love to do. It's who I am, not just what I do. It's
in your nature.
It is.
Yeah. You talk about collaborating, and I know we talked a lot about the police department also, but I know you're collaborating also with the sheriff, Harold Toulon, who we're big fans of and friends of. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration that you had with him in the Huntington School District and talk about what it's handled with care, correct?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about the sheriff in general. So when I worked in the county executive's office, he was assistant deputy county executive for public safety, and our offices were next to each other. So that's how we came to know each other all the way back, quite a bunch of years ago. When I became CEO of the Health and Welfare Council of Long Island, he was putting together an effort to deconstruct the pipeline to prison to really, do the work to keep people from ending up in a bad place. And so I worked very closely with him on that effort and the START program that he created at the prison, at the jails. And then more recently, there's a national program called Handle with Care, which is a program where if law enforcement responds to a house and there's children present, they are responsible for getting the address of the house and the schools the children go to and sending a Handle with Care notice to the district. What that does is two things. For the kids, if they go to school the next day and their homework isn't done because maybe they were evicted the night before, they aren't punished. They don't lose recess. They get supported. And so it mitigates trauma for kids going through hard things. The second thing it does is it helps the school district to make sure they're responding appropriately to a kid who's maybe withdrawing or maybe having behavioral issues. But the other thing that it does, and that I heard about so frequently when I was looking to do this, is that it helps law enforcement, because a lot of times you respond to a house and there's kids present and you see something awful and you go home wondering what's going to happen to those kids, and it weighs on your heart and it weighs on your mind for weeks and months past that incident. And so this way, law enforcement knows that there's a response, there's someone paying attention who knows child development, who's going to take care of those kids no matter what they just witnessed. So it's a really great program. We instituted in the Huntington School District as a pilot with the Sheriff's Office, and that I'm really hoping expands to SCPD and all of Suffolk County. It makes a difference for everybody.
It's a pilot program. Can you talk about how, do you know the numbers or how it's working out so far? And
so we just started it. So I don't have numbers. I mean, I know that there have been Handle with Care notifications made. Okay. I don't have the numbers or the data yet because we just instituted it. But I could tell you the sheriff's office was super excited about it. I've had a number of deputy sheriffs come and talk to me about how much it means to them, again, to know that there is a future for those kids where they're going to get the resources they need.
Right.
That's awesome.
That sounds like a great program. It sounds like it's well overdue too. Because I remember as a kid, I grew up in an area where it was very middle class, but there were some neighborhoods within the school district that were very low income, and there were, maybe parents that would get locked up from time to time, and maybe there were evictions that were going on. I know for sure I went to school with kids that were homeless and were quiet about it. So I could definitely see how something like this would be very helpful to those kids get through those difficult times when you don't yet have that coping ability or maturity to be able to get through it.
100%. And it's crime prevention too, right? Because the more we take care of people and help them be okay, the better they're going to function in society. That's just reality. I care a lot about safety when it comes to our young people. I think we have to, continue to look at opportunities to make our schools safer, to make our children safer. I worked with Assemblyman Phil Ramos in the Brentwood part of my district and was able to secure funding. I was advocating for the 9th grade center in Brentwood for a new security system because the school district talked to me about the need for that. And so these are the kinds of things that I try to do. I also think when we look at crime prevention, it's about giving people opportunities, right? So another thing I did was bring the first pre-apprenticeship program to Suffolk County, of all of Suffolk County, because kids who aren't going to college, they can get into good union jobs and have a good future. And again, that helps people to be productive members of society and have good lives. And I think we have to strive for that.
I like how you recognize that too. And I think it really starts with our children. As you said, I think like when a kid goes to school and something's going on at home, they might not be as engaged in the classroom. The last thing that you want happening is the morning after there's a huge incident at the house and the police respond, is for the teacher to yell at that kid and discipline him or punish him for not doing the homework or whatever was due that day.
Yep. No, we want to like reduce trauma. If a kid goes through something bad at home and now they're in a school where they spend so much of their day, we want to make sure that school environment is able to do its best for that child.
I think in the long run, I think it creates a more engaging atmosphere for the kids to stay engaged and want to go to school and keep building to get a job eventually. They don't quit on school but when they get to high school or whatnot, and they keep going and get the education they need to get a job, future on in life, and setting them up economically to be productive members of society.
Right. They don't get discouraged because the adults around them don't understand.
100%. And also, you talk about what the challenges other people face. Like they are across every level of socioeconomic status. So COVID-19, we just talked about that, right? That messed up life for so many families. Rich families, low-income families, all across the board. And so we see the impacts of that still today. And so if a family is having trouble and there's a law enforcement response, it could be in any neighborhood. We want to make sure the kids get what they need to be okay.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the pre-apprenticeship program, because to me, that sounds like a great program, because there's definitely a need for people to enter the trades now.
Yep.
And I think that we're coming to a time where with the inaffordability of college, there's a big deterrent to go into school when it comes to starting your adult life out in 6-figure debt.
Yeah, and not everyone goes to college for a whole sort of reason. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's just not their thing, right? And they want to get to work. They want to, take care of their families right away. And so we brought this program to one of the school districts in my district to partnering with Local 66 in Liuna to teach young people about the trades and to create this pre-apprenticeship program, which then gives them a step up when they apply to an apprenticeship program and helps them to be successful. A lot of people struggle with apprenticeship exams and success, and this helps these kids to be successful when they get there and build a great life. And that's what it's all about.
Right. And giving that foundational knowledge on how to maybe get into a trade union,
100%.
Because maybe you don't have family members that are in any trade unions. Maybe anybody's always ever talked about going to college, thinking that was the only pathway to success, but it's not the only pathway to success.
100%. I mean, look, maybe I'm naive, but I just always have hope that if you reach kids the right way, there's opportunities that fit who they are. And so we can't just use a one size approach to preventing crime, to making people live their best lives. We have to, be able to offer lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's a great program.
Thank you.
One of the things I want to circle back to, you had mentioned one of the organizations you worked with in the past actually prepared organizations for the possibility of an active shooter situation. And I was hoping you could expand a little bit more on that, because everybody's been through a fire drill. Everybody's been through, emergency drills, but maybe not an actual active shooter drill. And in that sort of emergency response, it could be very helpful if people are already prepared with a plan on how to evacuate the building, because maybe it won't work exactly the same way as, say, a fire drill that you might practice 4 times a year.
So I always say the way that you are successful in the crisis is to be prepared. That's the bottom line, right? So you don't see, God, the Knicks were last night, right? Were the Knicks on last night?
Yes, they were on last night.
So you don't see the Knicks show up, a game day, practicing, how to shoot a ball, right? They've been practicing forever, and that's how they know what it's going to feel like and how they're going to respond in different scenarios. Same thing with disaster. And so, the way that I look at it is we need to train people what to do in a crisis like that. When you hide, when you run, when you fight. And how to be able to come out being safe and surviving a crisis. So I worked with Drew Fiorello, who I've worked with for many years. He used to be a school resource officer in my district back in the day. And
the second precinct guy.
In the second precinct, yep. And so I had worked with a lot of those people, but I used to work with him a lot. And so when he was moved, he's a detective, I believe now in Homeland Security, I reached out to him and said, can we do this for the nonprofit sector in Suffolk so that we could just start to make sure that we're expanding people's public education around active shooters, right? So that, you're going to have a better job responding to an active shooter crisis if the people there already know how they need to respond.
Right.
And so we were able to do that. I also did the same thing in Nassau County with his Nassau County PD counterpart. And it was great. We did things like active shooter, stop the bleed, things that we want the general public to know how to respond to in case of emergency.
Right. Now, when you did these sorts of drills or training with these organizations, was there like a mocked police response? Was there like practice on our side of it as well for the responders?
So you have the most incredible Homeland Security division, and so they have a whole training that they come prepared with that includes videos, that includes sort of tabletop exercises and various strategies around how to best prepare and educate people, and to do it in a way that people can receive it, because these are obviously very disturbing conversations, and you don't want to have a training and everyone walks out anxious and falling apart. You want to make sure that people walk out feeling empowered and knowing what they need to do in a case of a crisis. And so they were very effective. We got lots of really great feedback about them.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Because, when I was still on patrol in the 7th precinct, I was one of the patrol rifle guys. And we often did active shooter scenario training, right? And, sometimes they'd send me to an empty school at 4:00 in the morning before it got filled up with kids and teachers. And we've done it at shopping malls. There was even one on the Port Jeff Ferry. Right. So we practiced these responses, but me being a midnight patrol guy, it was always just us responding. And then there were maybe some actors involved who were cops, but they were acting as, victims and, people that were there. But I never actually did it with, say, an active shooter drill at, say, an open business where they're evacuating as I'm going in.
Yeah, and it makes a difference. It's interesting, that was many years ago. To this day, I don't go to a movie theater or a restaurant without knowing where my exits are first.
Right.
Like it really changes how you think and how you operate in the world in a way that is helpful to promoting safety. I want to see more of these kinds of things, and I'd love to partner with you on them in the community as well. So we've done a couple of disaster preparedness trainings, in our district since I've been in office. But, thinking about natural disasters and other kinds of disasters. But active shooter is a type of disaster that requires a very specific response, and we should be doing more of that.
Especially because we're seeing more and more of it nationwide.
Yep. It's something we should really do. I'd love to partner with you on it.
Yeah, I think there would definitely be value. And maybe they are doing it now, because I've been off the road a couple of years, where there are, real civilians evacuating at the same time the police are practicing going in. But I know from my experience years ago, we did not do that. So I would like to see it, that collaboration between the department and some of the civilians doing it at the same time, their parts.
Yeah. It makes a difference. Again, you got to show up on game day ready to play the game.
Right.
And in a crisis, the same theory applies.
You never know what's going to happen.
Right. So. Exactly. You always got to be prepared for the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one of the things that we've also been constantly battling here in Suffolk County is the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
And I've definitely seen social media posts from you, events that you've held regarding some of the opioid epidemic things that you're doing to address it, like Narcan training and such. So can you just talk a little bit about some of those other things you're doing within the community? Because I know this is something that's affecting at this point, almost every family in Suffolk County has probably felt the effects of the opioid epidemic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And unfortunately, we were making gains in Suffolk County and then COVID-19 hit and everything went back. But yeah, no, I mean, so I've done Narcan trainings with the Huntington Manor Fire Department that requested them from me. I've done it with the Brentwood Library. I've done it in a number of places in the district. I work really, really closely with our addiction, substance abuse providers to find out what they need, figure out how we get resources together. Substance abuse is always, not always, but often comorbid with mental health issues. So it's also
Absolutely.
So I work with our school districts to, for example, see if they need mental health first aid training, and then working with nonprofits to get them those kinds of supports. Working a lot with our school districts where there's a lot of issues now with cannabis as well, and gummies that are, look like candy, to figure out what resources they need. How can I bring them resources? That's really important. But quite frankly, a lot of the work also is just sit literally in the office where we get phone calls from people who have family members in crisis and they don't know what to do. And it's making those connections and getting them into treatment. That's been really, really important. And, you do see that uptick in terms of the kinds of calls that we're getting. The other thing that changed during COVID that continues to be the case today is it used to be someone would call with like a unilateral issue. So if someone called the nonprofit I was working in back in the day, they might have said, look, I'm dealing with I lost my job. I need help with food. Nobody has those kinds of issues anymore. It's always multifactored. Like, my kid won't come out of the room. My, sister's drinking too much. My this, my that. People need, more robust help. And our nonprofits that are responding to addiction and mental health are seeing that and they're talking to me about it. So trying to figure out ways to get them more resources. Suffolk County also really needs to release the next round of RFPs for the opioid dollars. I look at that as blood money, quite frankly, if pharmaceuticals did the wrong thing. And we need to address that, and we need to get those resources into the street to save people's lives. So often, again, this is like one of those things that I always have to tell people, but, addiction doesn't discriminate. You can be any kind of person. You could be anywhere in your life, and things can happen. And so we need to take care of people.
So I'm glad you bring up that money side of it, too, with the county, because it's something that we haven't talked about prior on this show, but there has been a settlement within Suffolk County that brings some sort of relief to some of the victims of this opioid crisis.
And we need to get that money into the nonprofit experts. And I always say that because, whenever there's money to go around, lots of people, are looking at it, right? It's really important to use evidence-based, tested programs to serve people so that there can be actual recovery. You don't want people just to go, if you have an addiction and it's taken you years to develop an addiction, going into a program for 3 weeks is not the strategy to help you live a different life. You need a real plan with robust services. And so we have groups like, FCA and Thrive and the Association for Mental Health and Wellness, and organizations that, like, this is what they do. This is their bread and butter. They've become experts. They provide only evidence-based programming. And you have to make sure that those are the people getting the money.
Right. And that goes along with the same logic of what we talk about all the time with those open lines of communication and relying on experts in a certain field to be able to take their knowledge to make the best possible decision moving forward, in an educated way where we don't make new mistakes.
Right.
And there needs to be options too. Like you offered a couple of different not-for-profits that have these programs, but I think that not one size fits all in this 100%. Particular issue.
Absolutely. That's so the case. And it's so important to meet people where they are. The thing about addiction is that, and this is something I've learned from working with these organizations over time, Central Nassau Guidance and Counseling being one of them that operates in Suffolk. When somebody decides that they want help, if you don't get them help like that minute, they're not going to feel the same way 6 hours later. And so it's so important to meet people where they are. And that's why street outreach is also important, to have these vans that are going in the community. And if they hear that there's someone who wants to get into support, that they're right there to say, I'll meet you in the next 20 minutes. This is, and we'll get you assessed and we'll get you into treatment. Again, addiction, even though people who are mentally ill are more likely to be the victims than the perpetrators of crime, we know when we talk about crime prevention, we need to be looking at the mental health and substance abuse issues we have. And if we can invest there on the preventative side, then hopefully that relieves some of the enforcement side. Right.
Maybe it's addressing what the root cause is 100%. Of this person committing that larceny to feed their addiction. Right. Yeah. So, and you always want to try to address the root causes of things, because in the long term, hopefully it does more good.
And that's what I like about the Start Center that Sheriff Toulon created, right? So the idea of that is as people are getting out of his jail,
Right.
is that there's transition programs. And so what do you want to do? You want to prevent recidivism.
Right.
That's also what New Hour is doing with women who've been imprisoned. It's like, how do we create a situation for them so that we prevent recidivism?
We put them back in the community in the best way possible so that they can succeed.
Yeah, so they have the supports they need. And again, then you're reducing crime because you're not having to deal with the same repeat offender.
Right. It's all about breaking that cycle because
100%.
we always refer to them as jails and prisons, but what are they really? They're correctional facilities. The whole point is to correct the behavior. And if we could do these programs before they're reintroduced into society and they are successful and these people do become positive contributors and, maybe they're going to be the new local mechanic, or maybe they're going to be a carpenter. They're going to do something positive with their life instead of continuing the life of crime.
And I believe that, deep, deep, deep in our spirit, we all want to live our best lives.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's important also to say that we have to connect people to healthcare before they leave our jails. A lot of people, especially with, real mental health complex issues, they need to rely on psychotropic medications to be able to function in society. So we need to make sure those things are put in place so that everybody has access to whatever medication they need to be their best self.
Right. Yeah. There's so many factors involved, but I think we're all in agreement that getting to the root cause of some of these issues is probably where most of our efforts should be guided towards.
Yeah, and evidence-based treatment. So you don't have you have a lot of, especially in some of the other states, like in Florida, a lot of folks that come up here and try to prey on people who are vulnerable and get them into programs. And it's all about them making money. It's not about treatment. And so that's why I always say that, we got to make sure that when we give our money out as government, that it's going to evidence-based programs that are, tested and successful in turning around people's lives.
Yeah, and that is an important point because some of those programs, right, especially if they're a not-for-profit, right, if it's a business, they're in it to make money. So, I mean, I hate to be a cynic, but a return customer keeps steady revenue coming in, right?
Well, so that's why you got to work with organizations that are trusted, organizations that are committed. I think most nonprofits are all about public service. There's also a lot of private treatment centers, and some of those private treatment centers are very different from the organizations that are, not making money, that are just really providing the right services. But again, you have to look at everything across the board and make sure that money is going to evidence-based treatment and that people have good outcomes, that we're looking at their outcomes. We don't want somebody to go through a program and then end up, to your point, having to go through it 50 more times or end up, engaging in behavior that's not good. Sometimes recovery takes a really long time. I mean, there are people who are going to need to go through programs for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely.
We understand that. But making sure they're getting the best quality of care, I think, is in everybody's best interest.
Yeah, I agree. So, we've touched a lot on your history and some of the programs you've already worked on. What are some of the things you're looking at into the future? Like what's the next 6 months, the next year, next 2 years?
Yeah. So, I mean, affordability is a big deal. So I hear about it all the time. So I've been working on an affordability agenda that I'd like to introduce probably in January to address things that are just causing real difficulty for our neighbors. Also bringing resources to support people with affordability, especially our seniors, because I hear about it all the time. People who are living in these big houses, there's nowhere for them to downsize to, but they're not leaving their community. That's where they've lived for 60 years. So how do we help them with their utility bills? How do we, figure out where those opportunities are to get them some breaks so that they can stay there and live the best that they can while they're here? And so those are, the affordability side of things is really important to me. From a public safety perspective, definitely looking at the impact of this pilot, Handle with Care, and working to expand that. I'm working on some things relating to vaping because that's an issue that has been brought up to me quite a bit in our district. And
it seems like I see teenagers vaping all the time.
Yeah, and so we need to start holding some of these business owners accountable in new ways. And I have a whole bunch of ideas of how to do that. In fact, I've met with the DA's office. I've met with Commissioner Catalina and his team. I've met with a number of different organizations as well to learn what those challenges look like and figure out some real, to your point about root causes, systems responses. So it's not just like, we're checking a box, but how do we start to change the system to make it harder for our young people to get a hold of these vapes? So that's really important. And the environmental side is also important. A lot of people in my district are distressed by development, by the amount of development, by development that doesn't meet the needs in the community. So really making sure we're doing work to preserve land where we can, so people have parks and open spaces that they can enjoy. So we're protecting our clean water. Those are all things that matter to my district.
So one of the things that I hear about from especially our younger members when it comes to the affordability is like first-time homebuyer programs,
Yep.
right? And I know the county has some first-time homebuyer programs. The town of Huntington itself has one. Maybe just how could people go about learning about some of those to kind of help get their life started in a way that could be affordable for them to be homeowners?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways. So first of all, yes. And so I've been bringing the Long Island Board of Realtors into my district to do first-time home buying seminars to show people how they access those dollars. But here's the thing about Long Island. We have 2 counties. We have 13 towns. We have 95 incorporated villages. We have 125 school districts. I could go on and on and on. We have like all these separate taxing entities. It is so hard for somebody to figure out how to get resources because it's like everything is so bifurcated and all over the place. And so a big part of what I consider my role and I consider government's role is that public education, bringing those resources. That's why I don't just send out a flyer with here's some first-time homebuyer information. I bring people in and I do seminars so people can come and learn and ask questions and not feel dumb not knowing the answer to things, right? Like, again, we want people to get the resources that they are entitled to. It's my belief about outreach, and this is what I did when I ran the census work, and it's what I do for everything in my office, is you go where people play, pray, and eat. If you go where people play, pray, and eat, you're going to find your community members and you're going to really get information to them. And that's what I do every day.
Yeah. And I think that's great. When I was a rookie city cop at the time, I purchased my first home at 23 and I was able to utilize the first time homebuyer program for down payment assistance. And with those opportunities there, people might as well take advantage of them when 100%.
They can. But also things like addressing the mortgage recording tax and other things that are making it hard. Our heating fuel taxes, our sales tax. Like there's opportunities in times of crisis. Like there are some real challenges for people right now with the cost of food to suspend some things for periods of time and make a difference.
Yeah. Absolutely makes a difference, especially the price of Long Island right now. It's a little crazy. So
yeah, it's very hard to get started.
It's hard to get started and it's hard to stay.
It's hard to maintain.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is very hard to maintain.
I'll tell you what I hear at the doors a lot is you have seniors that are like, people say this to me all the time. They're like, look at me. I live alone. I'm widowed. Look at this house. I don't need this house. I'm not leaving my community that I've lived in for 6 years. Where am I going to go? They have children that have moved to North Carolina. So the young people go through our amazing schools and then don't stay here to contribute because they can't afford it. Our old people are staying in these houses that they can't be in. It creates a public health issue because as you age, you need somebody to check in on you. You need somebody to take care of you. So now you have a senior that is, you're getting all these EMS calls because nobody's checking in on them. They need more help than they're getting. You have young people that went through our amazing schools that aren't here. None of that serves anybody. And so we have to look at ways to make it so our young people can stay here and our seniors also have a way to stay here safely.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca, I think we touched on a lot of topics today. I think we were able to cover a lot of your history, a lot of your public service, some of your views going into the future. So I appreciate you coming on the show today and speaking to all our viewers out there and letting them know who you are and what you're doing out there.
It was such a joy to be here and thank you for all you do every day to keep us safe.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.